3 days. That is how long Russia waited after agreeing to a ceasefire before launching the biggest missile and drone barrage against Ukraine since the full-scale invasion began. 3 days. On May 9th, U.S. President Donald Trump publicly announced that he had asked both Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky to observe a ceasefire from May 9th through May 11th. Both sides agreed. The world exhaled slightly. Diplomats spoke carefully about momentum toward peace. And then, on the night of May 13th, 2 days after that ceasefire ended, Russia launched what the Ukrainian Air Force confirmed was the largest aerial attack on Ukraine since February 2022. Dozens of cruise missiles, hundreds of drones, all of them aimed at Kyiv. At 3 in the morning, as families slept in their beds, the first ballistic missiles began arriving over the Ukrainian capital. One of them, a cruise missile, hit a 9-story residential apartment building in the Darnitsky district. The building partially collapsed. People were trapped in the rubble. 24 people died. 3 of them were children. A girl born in 2008, a child born in 2010, a teenager born in 2013. None of them were soldiers. None of them were military targets. All of them were civilians, asleep in their homes, in a city that had just been told the war was winding down. Tonight we are going to break down exactly what happened in Kyiv on May 14th, what it reveals about Russia's true intentions in this war, and why the ceasefire agreement that gave the world false hope was never what it appeared to be. Drop a comment right now. Do you think Russia ever intended to honor that ceasefire? Yes or no? Because what happened on May 14th makes that question impossible to avoid. To understand the full weight of what Russia did on May 14th, you need to understand what preceded it. For weeks, the diplomatic environment around the Ukraine war had been shifting, or at least appearing to shift. Trump had been publicly engaging with both sides. He called Putin. He spoke with Zelensky. His envoys traveled between capitals. The language coming out of Washington was increasingly focused on ending the conflict through negotiation rather than military defeat. Then came Victory Day, May 9th, Russia's most sacred national holiday. Putin stood before an empty red square with no tanks and no military hardware for the first time since 2008. And he hinted publicly that the war might be winding down. He said he was ready to meet Zelensky in a neutral country. Trump announced the ceasefire window, May 9th through May 11th, and said both sides had agreed to observe it. For those 3 days, the attacks reduced. And then the ceasefire ended, and Russia launched its biggest attack of the entire war. The timing was not coincidental. It was not a lapse in judgment by Russian military commanders. It was a deliberate signal to Ukraine, to America, to Europe, and to the Russian domestic audience about what the ceasefire had actually meant to Moscow. It meant nothing. It was a pause, a performance, a diplomatic gesture with zero military substance behind it. And 24 people in Kyiv paid for the world's willingness to believe otherwise. Let us talk about what happened on the night of May 13th to 14th in specific detail, because the scale of this attack needs to be understood clearly. Just before 1 in the morning, Ukraine's Air Force issued a nationwide aerial alert. Russian MiG-31 missile carriers had been detected in the air, aircraft specifically configured to launch hypersonic ballistic missiles at long-range targets. Every region of Ukraine was placed on high alert simultaneously. Then the drones came first. Hundreds of them. FPV attack drones, Shahed-type kamikaze drones, a swarm that stretched across the country from east to west and overwhelmed Ukrainian air defense systems that were forced to track and engage targets across dozens of simultaneous vectors. Then the missiles arrived over Kyiv around 3 in the morning. Ukrainian air defenses engaged as many as they could. Air defense units across the capital fired interceptors. Some missiles were knocked down. Others got through. One cruise missile found the Darnitsky district of Kyiv. It hit the corner of a 9-story apartment building at a moment when most residents were asleep. The structural components of that corner collapsed. The floors above pancaked onto the floors below. The people inside, families, pensioners, working adults, teenagers, children, had seconds of warning if they were lucky. The first responders arrived in the dark and began the work of pulling people from the rubble. That work continued for more than a day. When it was finished, 24 bodies had been recovered. 48 people were wounded, including 2 children. Among the dead were 3 young people born in 2008, 2010, and 2013, the youngest of whom was 13 years old when Russia's missile ended their life in a 9-story building in a city that had been told peace was coming. Kyiv observed an official day of mourning today, May 15th. Tell me in the comments, where is the international outrage about 24 civilians, including children, being killed by missile strikes days after a ceasefire? Because the silence from certain corners of the global community is as important as the attack itself. Now, here is the detail that Zelensky revealed that makes this story even more alarming. After Ukrainian experts analyzed the wreckage of the cruise missile that destroyed the Darnitsky apartment building, they reached a conclusion that Zelensky announced publicly. The missile was built in the second quarter of 2026, not from a stockpile assembled before the war, not from Soviet-era inventory, not from reserves built years ago. This missile was manufactured in the second quarter of 2026. In the months between January and June of this year, while the war was ongoing, while Western sanctions were supposedly crippling Russia's military-industrial base. Zelensky said it directly. This means Russia is still importing the components, resources, and equipment necessary for missile production in circumvention of global sanctions. Think about what that means. Every sanctioning government in the world, every country that has imposed export controls and financial penalties on Russia specifically to prevent it from building weapons to use against Ukrainian civilians, those sanctions are being circumvented right now, today, in 2026. 4 years into a war that has killed hundreds of thousands of people. Russia is sourcing the electronics, the precision components, the guidance systems, and the manufacturing inputs it needs to build cruise missiles through third-party countries, shell companies, and black market channels that the international sanctions regime has failed to close. The missile that killed 3 children in Kyiv on May 14th was made with components that somebody sold to Russia knowing, or choosing not to know, what they would be used for. Zelensky said directly that stopping Russia's sanctions evasion schemes must be a genuine priority for all partners. That call will receive polite nods in diplomatic circles and accomplish nothing unless governments treat sanctions enforcement with the same urgency they treat the diplomacy of ending the war. But here's the dimension of this story that most coverage is missing entirely. While Russia was bombing Kyiv, while those 24 people were dying in the Darnitsky apartment building, Ukraine was not sitting passively. Ukraine launched 355 drones overnight into Russian territory. 355 in a single night. It was one of the largest Ukrainian drone attacks of the entire war. Russian air defenses worked through the night to intercept them across multiple regions. Some were shot down, others were not. In Ryazan, a Russian city approximately 100 kilometers southeast of Moscow, 4 people were killed by Ukrainian drone strikes. One of them was a child. And then the smoke appeared. Massive plumes of black smoke rising from a fire at Ryazan's local oil refinery, one of Russia's key fuel processing facilities, now burning because of a Ukrainian drone that penetrated Russian air defenses and struck its target successfully. Ukraine has been systematically targeting Russian oil infrastructure for months as part of a deliberate strategy to deny Russia the export revenues that fund its military operations. That strategy produced another result on the night of May 14th, while Russian missiles were falling on Kyiv. What happened that night was not one side attacking another. It was 2 countries exchanging the most intense aerial strikes either has launched in months, simultaneously, while diplomatic conversations about ceasefire and peace negotiations continued in parallel. The gap between what is being said at the diplomatic table and what is happening in the skies over both countries is the most important story in this war right now, and it is not being told clearly enough. Now let us address the question that everyone watching this needs to sit with. Trump has publicly stated that he wants to end this war. He has called Putin. He has pressured Zelensky. He has positioned himself as the deal-maker who can bring peace where years of European diplomacy failed. He asked both sides to observe a ceasefire from May 9th to 11th. They did, for 3 days. And then, Russia launched its largest attack of the war. What does that tell you about Russia's negotiating position? About what Putin actually wants from any peace process? The Royal United Services Institute, one of Britain's most respected defense think tanks, published an analysis saying that Putin is in a psychological trap. His regime justified its authoritarian model by promising to restore Russian greatness. Any peace deal that can be perceived as anything other than complete victory is no longer a political option available to him. He cannot win this war. He cannot afford to continue it indefinitely. But he also cannot agree to terms that look like defeat. So he does what leaders in that position have historically done. He signals openness to talks. He agrees to ceasefire windows. He uses the diplomatic space to demonstrate reasonableness to audiences in Washington and Beijing whose support he needs. And then he fires the missiles. Because the missiles are also a signal to the Ukrainian population, to the Ukrainian military, to Zelensky, to NATO, to anyone watching who might think that because Putin spoke softly at a Victory Day podium, he was ready to stop. He is not ready to stop. 24 people in Kyiv are dead because the world needed to be reminded of that. And 3 of them were children who had no role in this war, no voice in this diplomacy, and no warning before the 9-story building they were sleeping in came down around them. Kyiv observed a day of mourning today. The ceasefire lasted 3 days, and Russia's newest missiles, built with smuggled Western components in the second quarter of 2026, are still falling. This is the Intel Room. If this video told you something the mainstream coverage is leaving out, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell. We will be here for every development as this war moves toward whatever comes next. We will be watching.